Hello, scholars. Welcome to lesson number 3 in our study of Elizabethan England. Our objectives for today. What we are going to accomplish, what we are going to learn about. We will learn about Henry VIII's successor, meaning the person to rule after him. And we will learn about Henry VIII's successor's successor and his successor's successor's successor. Huh? It'll all be clear once we get started. But basically, we are learning about the next 3 rulers of England after Henry VIII. We ended our last class with the death of Henry VIII at age 55 in 1547. Now you'll remember he left behind 3 children. At the time of his death, Mary was 31, Elizabeth was age 14, and Edward was 9. Henry VIII died without fulfilling his wish to have more sons. Remember, Edward was quite sickly when he was born and growing up, and was not always thought that he would survive into adulthood, so Henry had wanted more sons, but died without getting more of them. So, who became the ruler of England? Do you think it was Mary, the oldest, even though there had never been a queen ruling over England? Or perhaps it was Elizabeth, since Henry had divorced Mary's mother? Or could it be his son Edward, just 9 years old? Some of you are 9 years old or almost 9. Could you imagine ruling over an entire country? Well, it was Henry VIII's son Edward who became king and was crowned Edward VI, King of England, at the age of just 9 years old. Because he was quite sickly, and remember, was just 9 years old, Edward's uncle, Edward Seymour, served as Lord Protector, and his uncle Thomas Seymour was made Lord Admiral. What that means is that his uncles did a lot of the ruling in Edward VI's place, and all that power started to go to their heads. It didn't take long for Edward Seymour to try to control England through Edward VI, but he was overthrown by John Dudley, who took control as Edward's chief advisor. More on John Dudley a little bit later. Do you remember how Henry VIII had broken England away from the Pope and the Catholic Church, creating the Church of England, all so that he could divorce his first wife? Well, during Edward VI's rule, his uncles developed the Church of England into Protestantism, which is another form of Christianity. They wanted to keep England Protestant, so when Edward fell ill and his sickness was discovered to be terminal, meaning it would cause his death, his council drew up a plan of succession because they did not want England to convert back to being Catholic. Now, it's important to remember, scholars, that Edward VI does not have a male heir to succeed him, right? He's just now nearing 15 years old, so he does not have any sons to pass on the crown to, And this council wanted to make sure that Edward's sisters, Mary and Elizabeth, would not be next in line. Edward continued to get even more sick. Edward then named his cousin Lady Jane Grey. So just pause for a moment. Her connection to Henry VIII is that Henry VIII was her uncle. So Lady Jane Grey's mother was a sister to Henry VIII. So Edward named Lady Jane Grey as heir to the throne. His advisors made this recommendation because she would continue the Protestant movement in England. In naming Lady Jane Grey his successor, he skipped right over his own sisters, Mary and Elizabeth. Then, at 15 years old, Edward died from his illness, which had greatly affected his lungs. Upon Edward's death, Lady Jane Grey became the Queen of England for only 9 days. Let me explain what happened. Listen closely because it can be a little hard to follow. So, remember Edward's second chief advisor, the one who took over for Edward Seymour? His name was John Dudley. And remember, John Dudley had replaced Edward Seymour because Edward Seymour had let all that power go to his head, and he was then eventually overthrown, and John Dudley took over. Well, Lady Jane Grey was married to John Dudley's son. So the chief advisor is the father in law to the new queen. By putting his daughter in law Jane on the throne, the chief advisor, John Dudley, could keep England Protestant and he could also keep the power that was now going to his head as well. After all, Jane is only 15 years old and a female. She would need someone to run things for her. So he was pleased to have her placed as queen. At first, the council supported Lady Jane Grey as queen, as, remember, they wanted to keep England Protestant. But the people of England believed Mary was the rightful heir to the throne. This got the council worried. So they quickly changed their tune and then supported the idea of Mary being the true heir to the throne. They then declared the advisor, John Dudley, to be a traitor. Lady Jane Grey was deposed as queen, meaning she was removed from the throne, and Mary, Henry VIII's oldest daughter and Edward VI's sister, was now named the Queen of England. Scholars, all of that happened in just 9 days. Sometime later, Lady Jane Grey and her husband were beheaded for their involvement with the treason. So, Henry VIII's daughter Mary was crowned Mary I, Queen of England, proper heir to the throne. She immediately went to work doing three things. She first had Parliament proclaim that her parents' marriage was legal. Remember, her own father, Henry VIII, had declared that his marriage to Mary's mother, right, the first wife, was invalid and not legal, which then allowed himself to divorce her. So this first step was to reclaim that their marriage had been legal. Second, she had Parliament repeal all religious laws passed during Edward's rule, laws that related to England being Protestant. And third, she began a search for a husband. Why do you suppose she did that? Well, like her father and her grandfather, she wanted to have children who would succeed her as ruler of England and keep the line of rule in her family forever. Does that sound familiar? It should. Mary married Prince Philip of Spain, but she never ended up having any children. She did act to restore the Catholic faith to England, and she brought back old laws that people who were practicing other religions or Christianity in a different way could be killed, and their property and any valuables would be given to the crown, meaning to England, to the kingdom, right, to the government for running the country. Because of the return to these laws during her reign, following those new laws that had been brought back, about 275 people were burned at the stake as punishment for their religious beliefs. This punishment earned Mary the nickname Bloody Mary. Mary also, at times during her rule, feared that Elizabeth, her own sister, was plotting to take over the throne. She had Elizabeth locked in the Tower of London for quite some time during her rule, and then later even banished her to the countryside and kept her guarded, having guards watch over her, having her maids and nurses and tutors all working for her, for Mary, to keep an eye on anything Elizabeth might do. They constantly searched the cottage, checking to see if there was any proof of Elizabeth trying to take over for her sister. No such proof was ever found. It was during Elizabeth's banishment that Mary became sick with influenza and died at age 42 after ruling for 5 years. So Mary has no children and feared her sister Elizabeth taking over. So, scholars, who do you think is going to succeed Mary as ruler of England? Well, you're going to have to tune in next time to find out who it is. So let's review our work for today. We learned about Henry VIII's successor, Edward VI. Remember, Edward became King of England when his father died. He was just 9 years old when he became king. Then we learned about Edward's successor, Lady Jane Grey. Lady Jane Grey, who ruled for only 9 days as queen before she was deposed, meaning removed. And we learned about Lady Jane Grey's successor, Mary the First. So after those 9 days of Jane ruling, Mary claimed the rightful spot as heir to the throne and ruled for 5 years. She earned the nickname Bloody Mary for her enforcement of laws relating to practicing religion in a different way and having some people burned at the stake. I hope you learned a lot today about these next three successors to Henry VIII and are curious about who takes over as Mary's successor. Now to your assignment. Remember, you want to open the attached Google form, answer the 5 questions about today's lesson. Remember, you can go back to this video, listen to information again, look at the slides. When you're finished, remember to click Submit at the bottom of the Google form. Good luck, and thanks for joining me today for lesson number 3.